we had Jesse Ventura on the program about his book, American Conspiracies, Lies, Lies, and More Dirty Lies That Government Tells Us. And in that conversation, he talked about conspiracies throughout the history of the country. I want to clarify a little bit what my position is, okay? In the interview, I talked to Governor Ventura about what his positions are, and I didn't really take a stance. Sometimes I do in an interview, and sometimes I don't. Now, in the old days, were there conspiracies? It's just a matter of historical record that there were. I mean, a conspiracy is really just a bunch of people getting together and deciding to conspire on any particular act. It could be criminal, it could be not criminal. It could be political, it could not be political. Now, when we say conspiracies, of course, we mean political ones. For example, overthrowing Central American governments so that American business interests could gain an advantage. Did that happen? I don't think there's anybody in the country, any historian in the country, that would dispute that. Of course that happened. And was the CIA involved? Yes. Was the United States Armed Forces involved? Unfortunately, yes. In different countries at different times, and sometimes just the very threat of that force was enough to do the job, right? And that was done mainly for business interests. Now, of course, the government would also say, oh, political interests. We needed to dominate and control those countries. But when the banana company was not happy with how it was going in a particular country, and then all of a sudden, after they lose the contract, you have the coup, and after the coup, all of a sudden, they get the contract again, you get a pretty clear sense that it was about the banana company. That's why, of course, a lot of those countries are called banana republics, okay? Now, ironic, because it demeans them, but it should really demean us, because we're the ones who did that operation. Now, we've talked about it 100 times on the show. There are great parts to America. There are unfortunate parts to our history. Anyone who denies that is being ridiculous. Did we wipe out the Native Americans? Of course we did. Does anybody really either think that we didn't do that, or that was a good idea? They had it coming? Okay, so let's just have an honest conversation about the history of the U.S. Now, are those conspiracies by corporate interests still happening? Well, it depends on what you mean by conspiracy. If you say, hey, the head of Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan and Citigroup, as an example, get together and say, hey, let's buy all the politicians, and then let's make sure that we crash the economy, and then afterwards that they give us the money anyway, etc. No, I don't think that's how it works. Okay, now, do they get together in a room at different times? Yes, they do. And that was after the economic crash, when they told one of their former compatriots, Hank Paulson, the Treasury Secretary for Bush, hey, why don't you help a brother out? And he did, for a number of reasons, some of which are intellectual capture, some of which are, hey, these are my friends, and some of which are money interests that he's got and his friends and his family's got in those companies still. For example, I'll give you a quick example of it so you understand it's not some wild-eyed thing. It's perfectly normal and rational. Hank Paulson fired the head of AIG. Remember, AIG is rotten to the core in terms of they're the ones that lost all the money, and that taxpayers had to put in hundreds of billions of dollars to rescue them. And Paulson puts in Edward Liddy as the new CEO. Edward Liddy was not only at Goldman Sachs earlier, he still had a financial interest in Goldman Sachs. So you're going to be shocked to find out that Edward Liddy, as the new CEO of AIG, appointed by the guy who used to run Goldman Sachs, decided that Goldman Sachs should get 100% of their money returned on wild bets that had almost no market value. So that was $13 billion the two former Goldman Sachs guys decided should go to Goldman Sachs, even though the market valued those assets that Goldman held at almost nothing. See, that's how a modern-day conspiracy works. Now, why is a system structured to let Edward Liddy be the head of AIG and Hank Paulson is the head of the Treasury, et cetera? Because we've now, with the public corporations, set up a system that self-selects people. So if someone at Goldman Sachs develops a conscience, as an example again, there's a lot of companies involved, and it's the whole system, in my estimation, is corrupted. And it's because of the way that it's structured, incentives and disincentives. So if somebody at Goldman Sachs or Citigroup develops a conscience, well, he's not helping the bottom line, so he's moved out. He or she is moved out. And then you bring in someone else who says, yeah, well, of course I'm going to buy the senators. I mean, I'm going to donate to their campaigns. I mean, I'm going to hire their staff as soon as they leave. And as soon as they leave Congress or the administration, I'm going to pay them millions of dollars. That's the obvious way of buying these politicians. Why do they do it? Because it's a great return on investment. you're going to get billions for the millions that you gave them. If you don't do that, you get removed by the system. And you get until somebody comes in that is savvy enough to do that. Because you've set up an incentive for them to buy our government. And hence, they do. And so, in my opinion, that's the conspiracy we have. It's wide out in the open, and it's because of the system that we've set up. In the conversation we had with Governor Ventura, he said, you got to get a mix between capitalism and socialism. Well, I think that Michael Moore might be closer to right in this case. Now, I don't share Michael Moore's antipathy towards capitalism. I think capitalism is very, very important. I think, generally speaking, it's the right system for the markets. And we've seen what happens with the opposite side of the extreme. If you try communism and you say, all right, I'm not going to give you any incentives to make sneakers or drugs, but can you go ahead and make the best ones you can? People generally go, no, I can't. I have no interest in that if I don't have a financial incentive. So communism is one extreme, and I don't think it works at all. And by the way, it always gets taken over by a dictator. It's got a couple of flaws, right? Capitalism, on the other hand, we're told is the answer. But capitalism is also extreme if it's not checked by the government, by the people, by democracy. And that's where I think Michael Moore has it right in his book, in his movie Capitalism. So in capitalism, if you don't put a check on those corporations, well, they have an incentive to buy not just government officials, but the politicians themselves, but not just the politicians, but the generals. They have all the incentive in the world to buy our military. How do they buy our military? Again, they don't get in a smoke-filled room and they say, I'm going to buy General X and you buy General Y. No, they just, hey, look, if you're a general and you play ball, when you retire, you're going to get a couple $1 million from Lockheed Martin or Boeing or, name your defense contractor. And so if you are in office, you're in that case, you're still in your position at the Pentagon or wherever it might be, you have all the incentive in the world to say, oh, well, you know what, Boeing and Northrop Grumman, boy, do they need those contracts. Absolutely, right? And on it goes. So they buy the military, they buy the government, and they buy the media. The media is very important. Why do you never hear about a lot of this stuff? Because they've already also bought the media. Why? Because they have an incentive. The media is the one that gives you the information. If they can funnel that information to their advantage rather than their disadvantage. For example, if they were to have right-wing talk show hosts who would come on and say, oh, we shouldn't regulate the banks because that would be too much government involvement. We should have unfettered capitalism. We should have free markets. If you have hosts that say that, well, look at that. They get paid millions of dollars. Funny how that works. So the system itself, because of the way it's structured, if you do unfettered, unchecked capitalism, is also a gigantic problem. It is corrupt at its core. What I think you need is something that's in the middle. Now, look, Moore might call that socialism. Ventura might say that's not socialism. You can call it anything you like, right? But the bottom line on it is we need a system that's balanced, that says, look, of course we need a capitalist system. But at the same time, of course we need the government to be free of that corporate interest. If it's not free of the corporate interest, then it doesn't really represent us. We don't really have a democracy. What we have is a government that represents the people that pay it, and those are the corporate interests. And then you wind up having the disasters that we had. For example, the economic collapse in 2008. And what was the government's response to that economic collapse? Well, it was to give those same banks that destroyed the economy more money. Whose money? Our money. Can you not see that obviously we need a balance? And obviously we need a clean government that provides that balance. We need a cop on the block who's going to protect our interests, who's supposed to be our representative. That's not the system we have now. We have the opposite extreme of communism. And we need to get to a point where we clean up our government, and we clean up our media, and we clean up our military. One last example for you. Why do we keep having those endless wars? That's an interesting question. Well, if you know who makes money from the wars, the military-industrial complex. The military-industrial complex is a word or a phrase that was brought into the American sphere by Dwight Eisenhower, a Republican president, who was a general, who said, watch out, these guys have an incentive to capture the government, so we buy more weapons. And look, if you say, the good people in our government and the good people in our military would never advocate for further or more senseless wars just so that the people who are going to hire them later will make more money. Okay, I would call you a little naive, but here's something that's even less disputable and that also costs us a tremendous amount of money. we keep building more and more nuclear weapons, which we then promise we're never going to use. And then at the same time, we destroy the old nuclear weapons we made because we want to be good guys and we want to disarm some of the thousands of nuclear weapons we have. Well, isn't that a great little circle that helps the people who produce nuclear weapons? We keep building new ones and junking them 10 years or 20 years later, and the cycle goes on for trillions of dollars. All wasted. Because those guys have the incentive to make money off our ass, okay, for us to pay for those things. That's how our system is broken. Now, how we fix it and how we clean up the government, well, that's a long story, and that's a story we've been telling on this show and will continue to tell on this show. Certainly one of the answers is campaign finance reform. Certainly one of the answers is financial reform. But we need to have ground operations like ours and yours. Go ahead and be the media. Because if you don't get that message out, certainly the corporate media isn't going to do it. If we don't get that message out, you're never going to know that this war is being waged against you, that there is class warfare, that they've been conducting it for decades. It's just you don't know about it. It's being done to you. That's what we're trying to do here, is get the word out so we can get some balance in our government.